Welcome, welcome, welcome. Another Discourse Friday, and this one's gonna be about In the Heights. I liked it. It was a good movie. Um, I was grateful enough to see it on Broadway, I guess. And one thing that got me was, wow, this is a story about Latinos, and more importantly, in the Heights, in the context that I grew up there. And my quick funny story, I guess, about the Heights was, as a kid, I never identified it as the Heights. That's where my dad lives. That's where I guess like my aunt and my godmother lived and stuff. We'd go there all the time. I'd get my haircuts around there, eat around there, and all this stuff. But it never really clicked with me because I was a kid. It's just where I grew up, for the most part. From the BX, but spent so much time in the Heights. And it wasn't until I think high school. I was hanging out with a good friend of mine, one of my best friends, and it was late at night. His mom decided to offer to give me a ride home because it was late. I'm like, oh yeah, sure, okay. But she's like, oh, but first we have to drop off, I think like his grandma, back where she lives. I'm like, oh, where she live? In the Heights. I'm like, oh, I don't think I've ever been to the Heights. And we're driving there. I'm like, oh, I know where we are. Oh, I get my haircuts right over there. Oh, what the hell? And it clicked with me. This is the Heights. Because then, by the time I got to high school, is when everyone kept talking about the Heights as being a specific place and all this other stuff, and oh, I'm from the Heights and X, Y, Z. I'm like, I never saw it as something so grandeur and far away. To me, it was just home. And to the movie's perspective, and even the play, it does bring that sense there. And a common theme, growing up in the Heights or growing up around the Heights, that you see is portrayed in the movie and the play fairly well. You do have that degree of wanting to escape, that degree of being forced out, right? Because rents are rising, gentrification is happening, more so now than ever, and people are being bought out, right? I know one common thing that I noticed was people from the Heights were then moving to the Bronx, and then moving from Grand Concourse, just like in the movie, right? We went to Grand Concourse with the salon, and then moved from Grand Concourse up to Yonkers, and then from Yonkers to Mount Vernon. Like, it was a constant moving because of the affordability. And with that, the other traumas that happen within cities and poverty with crime. Like, even when I moved to Yonkers, it wasn't that bad, and then as I grew, yeah, it got worse. And thankfully today, it's better, right? But the movie, a lot of rep that it's getting right now is very negative in the context that, it was whitewashed, it was this, it was that. And I would have to say, yeah, but did you see the play? It's the same thing. Like all respect to Lin-Manuel Miranda, all respect in the world. He made an amazing musical and all that. But he's a light-skinned Puerto Rican playing a Dominican. Right? And then even the first, what's his name? Benny, originally was played by George Washington from Hamilton, if you could picture him. And he was in the movie, made a cameo as Mr. Frosty, which was pretty cool. But he's, again, a light-skinned black guy, right? And the entire cast of the original play was all light-skinned. Not to knock against him, but I look more at the context of you have to make it in Broadway, right? So I understand that perspective. It doesn't make it right. And especially in the movie context, which is why I appreciate that he called it out. They could have done better. And they could have. But at the same time, I don't know, as a Marvel fan and a comic book fan, they stayed true to the material. Everyone who was casted looked like the parts that were created. Right? They did cut out some scenes, which I was not a fan of. Like the scene, which I think is a very powerful essence of the play, is how Nina's father does not like Benny to be with his daughter. Why is that? Right? And that's a true thing that I saw growing up, where you do have that discrimination against darker skinned people, especially African Americans, who was Benny. And Nina, being Puerto Rican, is a citizen, right? Whether born here or there, is a U.S. citizen. And I think that was a pretty cool twist they did in the movie, where you have Sonny is an illegal immigrant, and he's a dreamer. So there's that whole perspective there. And that shed the light too, because how many people do we know in our lives who are dreamers, who were brought here as kids? They have no say in the matter. You know, your parent says go somewhere, they just pick you up and take you. Like, you know, you're in diapers, you don't have decisions. And from there, you go to school, and you're told to go to college your whole life, and then you realize you can't afford it because college is so expensive that you can't go. And I think the movie did a really good job with that, because they never did that in the play. Which again, grateful shout out to Mr. Silverman and Ms. Castro, if they ever see this, for taking a group of us in high school to a Broadway play. And that was a phenomenal experience, especially given the context of the movie. And I still remember being there in the movie theater. I remember this is like over a decade ago, and feeling that like sense of, wow, this is happening. Like I'm watching, kind of like I can relate to these characters, versus like Beauty and the Beast or freaking Lion King. You know, like those are animals and those are French, right? But it's very unique how a lot of Latinos are being against this movie, and respectfully so. But like, to me, I feel like it provides an opportunity for a bigger context of what truly happens in the Latino community, where yes, we do erase our Afro-Latino brethren, but let's call that out, you know? This could be a great opportunity to do so. And I feel like they missed an opportunity in the movie to have that dynamic between Benny and Nina's father, right? Because then that could have, like, whoa, why do you think this way, you know? And then they cut out the mother, which broke my heart. But good backstory in that. And it's intriguing to me how well done the movie was and how empowering it was, because if you look at the cast as the credits are rolling, very, if you want to say ethnic names, like this is a very diverse cast, all the way down to everything, right? The dancers, the main cast. So I give huge props to them in that context. But it's true, you can't ignore how they, again, light-skinned the cast, you know? And again, I go back to not knocking it, because it's what happens in telenovelas. And let's talk about that reality. How I never saw someone who looked like me on all the novelas my mom would watch growing up. I remember I never got into novelas, really. Again, because I grew up, my mom raised me as an American in the context that you need to learn English. This is going to help you more in life, and also teach me English. So it was like a win-win in her context. And I talked a little bit about that, I think, the last video. But again, here we are, and you have this notion of not putting darker-skinned people on the screens. And that goes back to the executives, to the producers, to the higher-ups who make the decisions, and also the casting. But also, it's like a full circle in a sense, because if you can't see yourself doing something, it's harder to do something. And I say that in the context of like me being like a park ranger. I don't see a lot of me. And one thing that kind of put the nail in the coffin for me to fully pursue this path was David Vela. Like seeing this park superintendent who should have been the director, but Trump and that freaking administration. But seeing him, who started off as like a basic ranger, or, you know, more or less, and was the superintendent of one of the biggest parks and most infamous parks in the United States, and is seen as this great leader. But it's still like a Texas boy, you know? And like, that clicked with me and helped push me to like, yeah, I could do this. So it does help. You know, it's not the end all be all, but in context, it does have an effect, especially on the youth. Like for me, I worked a lot with students, and it was so often that kids want to be baseball players. And my thought process is, you're not really playing 12 hours a day, you know what I mean? And you live in New York, so you have the seasons that go against you. You're not competing with these kids from the Dominican Republic. like the David Ortiz's, like the Manny Ramirez, like the Pedro Martinez, you know? And even today, look at the Tatis Juniors. Like, the level of opportunity that's there is not equivalent um, for some of the students that I've worked with in comparison to those who make these all-star teams and stuff. Not to say that they can't and to discourage them, but it's something I notice. But they can see themselves breaking through and becoming that baseball player, a basketball player, a football player, but never that scientist or teacher or astronomer to discover new planets, right? Because you don't see yourself doing that. It's hard to imagine, right? And even too, it becomes a foreign concept. And again, as an example with me pursuing this career, like as a ranger, basically, right? Like working with the National Park Service. A lot of people in my family have no idea what I do. And it's interesting because there's parks where they grew up, like, you know, like, and we've been to some of them and see the people in those uniforms. I'm the guy in the uniform. Like, that's what I do. And even more so now in the position I'm in now, doing historic preservation and maintenance work, you know, I'm like a janitor basically. So it's easy to comprehend what I do. But then the concept of why you have to go all the way to Arizona to do that doesn't make sense. But if I made it magically to the MLB with my terrible baseball skills, and I'm traveling all over the world, they completely understand what I'm doing because they see it, they understand it. So one thing I would have loved in this movie was that relationship between Benny and the father, because that basically anti-blackness that exists in the Latino community, or even in America for that matter, or the world, honestly, at this point, is true, you know. And it was interesting to me even growing up. I remember I dated this one girl who was black, or we were basically talking, whatever. I was talking with mom about it, and she was kind of anti it. And I'm like, what, you know? And I was thrown off by that, given the fact that like my mom is very like light skinned, like basically her skin was white, but my dad, his skin was basically black, and it came out like this. But it was interesting hearing her say like, no, I didn't introduce her, they never met, and I just showed her a picture, and she was already anti, right? And it wasn't until and things didn't work out with me and that person anyway, but years later me and my mom talked about that, and to her, she was just relating it to the neighborhood we were growing up in, because especially in that moment, I think it was like my stepdad just got jumped and stuff like right outside the house, and noticing who live in our neighborhood, she's relating it 1 and 2, so it creates this fear. And then you have the propaganda from like Fox News and Univision and all this other stuff build into this anxiety. So what does that create? And it creates this dichotomy of racism, you know, and it sucks. But that's what happens, you know. Not saying my mom was racist or anything. She just was connecting the wrong concepts of who this person was, you know. Given that person didn't even live in the neighborhood, but like these negative experiences or the visualizations of what you see and what you experience can affect how you react to certain things, and how you can also see yourself doing certain things. So did they drop the ball by not casting honest, like dark-skinned Latinos because we exist? Yes. Is the end of the world and it was a terrible movie? Absolutely not. Like, I saw some like travel bloggers that I thought of, like, oh, 0 stars, it was terrible, they whitewashed it, the music was giddy and terrible. I'm like, I don't know about that. I think that's a little extreme, because not for nothing, it's verbatim the play, you know. And if you didn't like the play, then you're not going to like the movie. But if you didn't see the play, you know, and you have that experience on Broadway, listening to Latino music or hearing Spanish words on Broadway, and overly like white plays, you know, and have that moment and experience, maybe that would have helped build a greater appreciation for it. Kind of that did shape my perspective watching the movie, because I had that grateful experience watching the play. And also note, Usnavi, to me, I can't picture him as Lin-Manuel Miranda or picture him as Um, I'm blanking on his name, but the guy who played him in the movie, I picture him more like someone who looks like me or who's darker skinned. Why? Because ironically, when I went to see the play, Corbin Blue from High School Musical was playing Usnavi. So to me, that was the person. And I'm like, how did they mess that up? Like, they cast the wrong person. This is weird because of how I experienced it. So you see that importance of visualization and representation that does exist in these atmospheres. So overall, I'd recommend watching the movie. I'd recommend looking at the deeper themes of it. And when Broadway opens up, go watch the play, because there is that little added things that they have in there. Yeah. And also, 96,000. That should have been updated. Like 96 million, that would have made a difference. Like 96,000 is not really much of anything, you know what I mean? Like, I'm in like, maybe a little TMI, I'm over $70,000 in debt. 96,000 would basically clear my debt and maybe a down payment on a house, maybe, because maybe I'll donate again to more, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's not that much money anymore in 2021. But I'm glad they kept it for the sake of the music. And they did have a scene where, and they did do it differently too, how they introduced the 96,000 and that whole situation. And I thought it was pretty cool. And I will say, I think, again, personal thoughts, I feel like they should redo this play in the context of like a horror thing, or like a sitcom, or not a sitcom, but like a NCIS, you know what I mean, or a SVU, because as Navi found out she had that 96,000 and he's struggling, I think he killed her. No, but in reality, nonetheless, it does help spark a greater conversation. I think that's one positive thing I'll look at, like with all these negative talkers and stuff about the movie, that I do appreciate. It is whitewashed, but that's also, like, you know, I see it from both sides. But overall, like, you know, it was solid. It could have been better, obviously, in the casting, but at the same time, I also look at, like, who's going for these roles, you know? Who's inspired to go for these roles, you know? Do we have that Afro-Latino section of the world or of our communities pursuing acting? Even more so than acting, musicals, you know what I mean? Because this was a musical, or, yeah, basically, right? Who's truly inspired and honestly doing that? And that's something that I would love to see more of. Inspired through the arts, pursue the arts, and continue down the path less traveled, because you don't know who you're inspiring. And I give, again, a huge shout out to Lin-Manuel Miranda, because he's inspiring people to pursue acting and more, you know, music, rap, combination of the two. Even the conversations that he hosts off screen, and the education in between the lyrics and stuff, which is pretty cool. So it does show that representation matters, and they could have done a better job, yes. But now let's talk about the realities, like how we were growing up and stuff. Like I was talking about a second ago, I'm beyond grateful how my mom raised me, but I also recognize some of the, like, opposite feeling she was giving me, you know? Because then, like, that situation when I was talking to that one girl who was African American, it got me, because, like, when we lived in the Bronx, one of my mom's close friends nearby was African American and never seemed to have an issue with anything or anyone. But then when she was, like, against me dating this girl or pursuing this girl, you know, based off just the looks, because I didn't talk about who she is, how she is, anything. That's how I interpreted it. And I was like, whoa. And we had a conversation about a year later. It was like, why did that happen in the first place? Because I've never got those notions. But then I started looking at the concepts of the environment we grew up in, and I started thinking even clearer, or not clearer, but more about the environment that she grew up in, because she did the same thing where in the context of dating someone darker skinned, because she dated and married my dad, you know, and that's a whole interesting concept. I thought about even then as like, I think it was in high school, whatever it was, and then looking at it now, analyzing what truly was happening, it creates more of a sense of, you know what I mean? Like, I think Paul Mooney said it great too. It's like, it's not like we can be quote unquote racist in the context because we don't have the power in the dynamics, but we're players in it, right? I think it was something else I was thinking about recently too, is the concept of you could do something racist, but does it make you a racist? Like, I know it's weird. I want to talk more about that. So if you have comments on this section, please let's have a discourse on it. Yeah, I've noticed. I want more conversation and things to be happening, but at the same time, you know, life. Yeah. But overall, I definitely recommend watching the movie and having deeper conversations in the context of perspectives, right? What your family truly thought or how they were raised, and questions of things that they were, like things that were pushed upon them. Because remember, like because my mom, she was born in 65 and my dad was born in like 54, 56, right? What else was happening in the world, you know? And especially in the context of the Dominican Republic, we had Trujillo, and Trujillo was basically killing off all the dark-skinned Dominicans and was pushing this agenda or this idea of white is right? Evil dictator, man. Yeah. Overall, definitely recommend watching the movie. It's a good time, good music, empowering in my personal opinion, and relatable, especially if you grew up in the Heights. You recognize these areas and these landscapes and these sounds, the beats, the discussions, the morality of it all, the blackouts. I still remember going through that blackout when I was a kid back in the Bronx with my grandma. That was wild. Had all the candles and everything. And then, yeah. But nonetheless, I'll end it here. Comment what you think, and you know, talk to family and friends about this stuff, because there is a discrepancy with representation, especially within the Latino community, in the media that we portray and the roles that we push. Right? Everyone could see Sofia Vergara, Colombian. There's a lot of dark Colombians. Where are they? Where's the Zoe Saldanas? You know what I mean? Like, there's more out there that is Latino and Latinx, to be respectful in that context, that isn't fully portrayed. How can we change that? How can we demand that? But more importantly, how can we be that? Till next time.